Thank you so much for that warm welcome and not needed long introduction. We are so thrilled to be here. A few of you, I think, joined us when we did a presentation a little bit ago for the faith community nurses. We had a lovely time. So if some of you are joining us again, some of the information may be repeat, but we're glad to be with you once again. So again, my team was just introduced. They come with a very rich background. Each of them, you'll be hearing from them. Jasmine is doing her master's in social work, but she's got experience working in lots of areas, including Korea. So I love the diversity that our students are able to bring. Eric is joining us. He is one of our dual degree students. So he has completed his MDiv, his master's in divinity, and now is getting his master's in social work with the clinical skills. So he is able to bridge those worlds for us. And he has pastored for many years. And then Sarah, who is from Germany, currently back in Germany, is joining us today, but she's also spent time in Uganda and other places. So these are interns that, although they're interns, they're very much colleagues. And so we are going to present together. What you're going to notice is that this is a group of not only qualified individuals, but very passionate individuals about getting the word of trauma out there, especially to our world church. And so we're going to do our best not to go over time because they get pretty passionate about sharing this message. And you will see that. So Eric, let's start sharing the PowerPoint and let's get right into it. So again, we are thrilled that we've got the honor to have this center at Andrews. This is our new center. We've been official for about a year. And the goal of this center, honestly, the university and its entities felt very passionate. I see David Sidlagic on here, who is part of that. All of us talking together about how we would like the world church to understand the message of trauma and the healing that can come from that. All right, what you'll see in our next slide is just a quick, brief picture of us at the center. Angie did talk about, we've had the privilege of going overseas and presenting in other countries, obviously doing Zoom. And the reason we bring that up is because some of what we want to talk about is, even though today we're talking specifically within the North American division, trauma is worldwide. And some of the things that we want to talk and share with you, we are finding crosses all cultures, crosses languages, and that God's message of restoration is for all people. We'll now go our next slide.
So, like Professor Ingrid talked about, trauma is so important in today's society because we're experiencing so much of it. We're dealing with things that we've never dealt with before, and they're impacting not only our mental health, but also our physical health. And so that's what we want to talk to you guys today about, is about how to address that type of trauma and how better to address it with different techniques. We want to encourage you to do counseling and to encourage others to do counseling as well. But sometimes it's not always possible to get to counseling. And so what happens when we can't get to counseling? We have to go use other techniques. And so we're going to teach you guys that today. We're also going to look at the connection between both faith and science in the trauma world. And we're going to also look at post-traumatic stress disorder and what we can do as faith-based organizations to help people who are dealing with this trauma.
So as we get started, we sometimes like to start our presentations with a community meeting or a community meeting. This is in the context of the sanctuary model, also what the presentation is somewhat titled, as we saw in the introduction slide, and you will learn a lot more as we continue on about the sanctuary model eventually. So this is part of that, and even us as trauma team, the staff there, we love to do these community meetings. So we will be breaking you up in groups in just a little bit as I am sharing with you how this is going to happen. We believe that to become a trauma-informed community, we are encouraged to want to learn how to listen, to create a safe space. So these community meetings are supposed to be non-judgmental check-ins with each other. So you will have in a couple of minutes the opportunity to share with about 3 to 4 people about these 3 questions that are stated here on the screen. For one of them is, how are you feeling today, right? We want to learn to name what we are feeling, what we are going through. The second is, what are your goals for today? And I think this is really somewhat a biblical approach. We see even Jesus telling us that, as he says, don't worry about tomorrow, right? So let's focus on today. So these questions are very intentional. And then of course also, who can help you with that? Community meeting says it already, it's about community. Now, we as Christian, I think that's wonderful that we do that and tend to have this go-to person that we want to name as, oh yeah, God is gonna help me with that. And I think that's great. I believe it's wonderful that we have that at the forefront of our minds. However, God is not an option as an answer for this question, because God created us in community, right? He also, I believe, wants to use community to heal or bring healing to us. So we want to utilize the people that are around us. So as you answer these questions, think about people who really are in your immediate environment, maybe, or who are with you in that project, that goal that you need to complete, who can help you and support you. And then, just utilize them. When we do these community check-ins, we sometimes say, we want to have a little bit fun with this, right? So we decided to change it up a little bit. Sometimes we are asking, instead of just, how are you feeling today? What color do you feel like today? Or what car do you feel like today? So if you do them in the future, and we are hoping that you will do them in the future, think about some of these options. Today, we would like to encourage you to think about what season of the year you feel like. You can see that on the picture here, right? We have spring, summer, fall, and winter. And maybe to give you a little bit an idea of how this can sound, if I would be in a group right now, maybe Ingrid would be there. She would ask me directly, Sarah, what season of the year do you feel like today? And I personally feel like fall right now. Fall is for me a season of change, right? Colors is still very pretty and colorful. And that is a little bit what I am going through right now. Then it would continue on, and Ingrid would again ask, what are your goals for today? And I would say, for me personally, my goals for today is to get through this presentation. I'm currently in Germany. Some of you may have heard that. So for me, it's already 10 p.m. And by the time we will be done with this presentation, it may be around 11:30, right? So that's my goal for today. And who can help me with that? Of course, my team, right? I know that they will be carrying me through this whole presentation. So this is just to give you an idea of how this can look like. And we would like you to experience that right now. So you will get an invitation to join a breakout room, and we would love for you to accept that. And let's each take about a minute to go through those 3 questions. And I want to encourage you to ask somebody. So, and then go in the circle, or it's not really a circle, but I think you know what I mean. When the person has finished sharing, that individual can ask the next person. And we will put the questions also in the chat so that you can see them and read them. But again, how are you feeling, or what season of the year do you feel today? What are your goals for today? And who can help you with that?
Welcome back. I think for some of you, it might have not been enough time. But you know what? It's better to be eager for more time than to be bored. So hopefully you got a little taste of what a community meeting is like. And you were able to enjoy that a little bit as we went through that. So.
Yes, thank you. Actually, that's my first experience of having a breakout room. So I was not sure what to expect, but I can see it certainly can be an asset for sure. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad it was fun. We're going to do it again in a little bit. All right, Eric, take us back to our PowerPoint, and hopefully that energized all of you enough so that we can continue learning together.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about, well, we're going to talk a lot about trauma, but now we're going to try to define trauma a little bit. There's a lot of definitions for trauma. These are some things that we as a center have picked out. Now, trauma is something that's triggered by a traumatic or life-threatening event that is outside the normal range of daily human experience. It can also be triggered by witnessing or learning about an event involving actual or threatened death, serious injuries, or sexual violations. These events confront people with such horror and threat that it may temporarily or permanently alter their capacity to cope, their perception of threat, and their self-concept. Now, something that we really want you to understand is that trauma is not the event itself. As you notice, trauma is triggered by an event. So what would trauma look like? A form of trauma is known as PTSD. I'm pretty sure many of you have heard of PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event, such as a natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist attack, war combat, or rape, or who have been threatened with death, sexual violence, or serious injury. Once again, trauma is not the event itself, but is what is triggered by the event. And in some cases, especially if symptoms are prolonged, these symptoms can turn into PTSD. Prior to turning into PTSD, there's something known as acute stress disorder, which is what happens immediately after a person has experienced something traumatic. Even prior to someone experiencing something as acute stress disorder, someone could deal with adjustment disorder, which deals more with everyday life stresses, not specifically something that happens outside of the normal norm of human experience. The point that we're trying to make is that trauma is real, is something that's triggered by a dramatic event. It's not the event itself, but after that event occurs, something happens in the mind that changes our conception of ourselves and the world around us. And one of my favorite definitions about trauma nails this point down. Psychological or emotional trauma is damage or injury to the mind after living through an extremely frightening or distressing event. It may result in challenges in functioning or coping normally after the event. Now, again, the point is being made that trauma is not the event itself, but is what happened after the event. Later on, we're going to be talking about triggers, and we're going to be talking about how different people experience different things. But the fact of the matter is that there are people who are walking around with PTSD. There are people that are walking around with certain things that have been triggered because of something that happened early on in their lives. And these are real things that need to be addressed and need to be taken care of.
So let's talk about the brain. Many of you may even know the brain better than we do, because I know we've got medical professionals here. But when we talk about the brain, when we're presenting on trauma, and we've even done this, with people overseas, et cetera, we talk about the triune brain, right? So, and even sometimes when we work with kids, we talk about the thinking brain, the feeling brain. So you see there, right? We know we've got the prefrontal cortex, which is we do the executive functions, the limbic system at the top of the spinal column, and then what's called the reptilian brain or the crisis brain. And quite often we talk about fight, flight, freeze, fawn, 2 new ones, and flock. So Eric, in the next slide, let's talk a little bit further about these stress responses. So again, what's happening in the body, right? The amygdala reaches out and says, oh, danger, danger, danger. So let's think about an illustration. For example, you're taking a Sabbath walk. And as you're walking, you're by yourself. You hear a little branch noise and maybe another little noise. And, you wonder, is it a squirrel? What is it? Then you hear a couple of more crunches. And all of a sudden, there's a grizzly in front of you. And then suddenly that grizzly actually rises up. So what's your body going to do? You're either going to fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and the new one, which is flock. So for many of us, we know the fight, flight, freeze response. The fawn is a new one that's being used in the field to discuss kind of the submit, and you just go along with the situation. And then the flock response has actually been studied specifically in refugees, where groups of people gather together in a crisis situation. So again, with the grizzly bear, right? You're gonna respond. Maybe you'll fight it. I hope not. Flight, flight, freeze, fawn. But often when we talk about this story, I also say, maybe it seems strange to hear about the grizzly bear because I don't live where grizzlies are. But if we're being metaphorical, what if that grizzly comes home every night? What if that grizzly comes into your bedroom every night and you're a child or you're a woman who is in the throes of domestic violence? Or what if that grizzly was part of your childhood and now you're triggered at work and there's grizzlies at work? So we see where that stress response could be triggered numerous times. Okay, next slide, Eric. Thank you. He's being my slide person. All right, I'll pass it along a minute.
So most of you guys know what the ACE study is. Those of you who have been in our last few training sessions or have previously studied it on your own or within the medical profession, but it's the adverse childhood experiences. And we know that they have lasting effects throughout your entire life. And so it's important just to hint at it that once you get to 4, that's when it becomes very, very serious. And it doesn't matter which 4 on the list that are that people take the test on. It doesn't matter which 4 there are. Some people say, oh, the sexual abuse and physical abuse are higher, but you could have spiritual abuse. You could have divorce in your own house. And so those can have lasting effects. And so it has lasting effects on your health, the actual behavior, and the life potential. And if we go to the next slide, Eric, we see this right here where you're more likely to have certain traumas. So you're more likely to be an alcoholic. People are more likely to have sexually transmitted diseases, inject drugs, antidepressant medication. So it has very, very serious lasting effects on the body and on the mind. And it's important to remember that when we look at children and when we look at ourselves or church members or anyone that we come in contact with, they could be going through the same things.
Now, just to illustrate that a little bit with you, we'd like to do a paper exercise, we call it. So if you have a piece of paper handy or can grab that really quick, I'd love for you to do that with me. It can be any kind of plain piece of paper that you have available. And then we will draw a brain on this. So due to the time restrictions that we are experiencing, it doesn't have to be a very great art piece. This is my brain. You see just a circle that really pretty much fills out that paper. So if you want to do that with me, as I said, feel free to do that. Grab a piece of paper, draw like an oval or circle on your piece of paper. What we will be doing now is we will fold this paper in half, just this way here. And then you have a half piece of paper, right? And then you fold this again. Okay. And this is what you should be holding here right now. Now, those of you who may have not had a piece of paper, I would like to encourage you to open up your chat box or maybe unmute yourself and tell us a few things, or even those who have the paper, that you would consider that are potentially traumatic to individuals. What are circumstances, situations that people are maybe going through that could be potentially traumatic? Any ideas? Put that in the chat as you want to, or unmute yourself, feel free.
Abduction from a
Okay,
park.
abduction, let's use that. And then you can rip at the folded page here, just a piece of paper out. Any others? Thank you. Dr. Sedlacek is saying, loss of a loved one. Thank you. Let's rip out another one. Very good. An accident. Let's rip out another one just along this folded line, and we would be able to probably continue on with many, many more. But let's keep it for this illustration just right here. Now, when you open up your paper, yes, illness. Thank you, Terry. That's definitely another one. We still have our brain here, right? And you see that it actually has holes. So this is an illustration for us to understand what trauma does to the brain. Now, of course, we will not have actual holes, but it definitely does something to the function of it. And if Eric could start our slideshow again, then we will be showing you more in depth what that really means. Thank you for doing this with me.
So here's a brain image of a child on the left, healthy brain on the right. It says an abused brain. And this child was not physically abused, was not beaten over the head, which, you know, for a while, there was this idea of PTSD. Eric talked to us about, you know, the unseen wounds, right? We would see soldiers come back and they didn't have wounds on the outside, but we didn't know what was going on in the inside. We knew there was emotional things. Well, what we can see here is that there is actual biological changes in the brain. So again, this child was not physically abused. This child was emotionally abused. And you can see the difference in this brain. So the paper exercise we just had you participate in is something we specifically do with teachers or parents that are working with children, because when we talk about, you know, here we are in the classroom teaching kids math. How's the kiddo on the left versus the right processing math? Think about the prefrontal cortex, right? We talked about the thinking, the executive functions of the brain. When we present to pastors, we talk about sharing, you know, evangelism or the gospel message. These are two different individuals. How are they going to view the world? You know, thinking through how their brain works, how their brain is viewing the world because of trauma. And I remember when I came onto the field early on, you know, these things were coming out and there was this sense of, what are we going to do? We can't go back. We can't go back and take away all these things. What can we do? But as the field continues to develop, it's amazing to see how the brain can see activity again, because there are things we can do, and we're going to touch on some of those today. And that's that exciting piece where God still provides restoration and healing. So there you also see a picture. Oh, sorry, Eric, just put me back there a minute. Dr. Bruce Perry, well-known child psychiatrist. For us as Adventists, he came on the scene. He was actually a child psychiatrist that was brought in to work with the children after Waco. Do y'all remember when the children were sent out? He came in to work with those traumatized children, and he also does a lot of this brain imaging, but he also has done excellent work into how the brain can heal and can be restored. And it's always within community and within appropriate relationships. All right, Eric, go on. Next slide, thank you. So again, the stress system, the brain is flooded with cortisol. And we see that it starts to pool on the frontal cortex, which can inhibit regulation. It can affect the ability to attach, can limit cause and thinking, and decision-making. So if these cortisol levels remain too high for too long, so the body is in this fight, flight, freeze, traumatic, acute stress state, these cortisol levels can lead to depression and decreased prefrontal cortex functioning. All right, next slide. And again, we're kind of going through this pretty quickly. So this buildup of cortisol can lead to changes in attention, impulse control, sleep, fine motor control, dysregulation. And for children, it can even affect the frontal cortex from fully developing. Now, currently, scientists are saying the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until the age of 25. So this is affecting a lot of our young people, not just our children. Next slide, Eric. So cortisol flooding is a real thing. Again, cortisol is a good chemical for our brain, but a little is calming, but in a crisis, it's too much. And some of us might be experiencing that now because of COVID. So we're adding stressors, we're adding to traumatic situations. And then it becomes where a person is so fearful, they have a hard time regulating back to calm. So again, if we were to go back to our grizzly situation, you confronted, the grizzly growled at you, you turned around and you ran and you made it back to your car and the grizzly went the other way. At that point, right, you would probably breathe, etc., and you're able to calm down because that stressor is over. But for so many of us, that we're staying at that heightened sense of cortisol, of just stressors. So, and especially if there has been past trauma, then we're even higher in just staying at that altered state. Next slide.
So I think we're all familiar somewhere or another with the window of tolerance. I think it's easy to get over certain things when we feel at peace, at ease, right? When certain situations come about and we're relaxed, it's easy to deal with those things. But when we're not relaxed, or we have tension, our cortisol level is too high, then we could easily erupt. I mean, we could just become angry, become out of control, or we could zone out. And this is what trauma does. It either makes us hyperarousal, which it gives us anxiety, angry. We feel out of control, overwhelmed. Our body wants to fight and run away. Whenever something happens, even if it's something small, our window tolerance gets so tight, so small that anything could kind of throws off our game. Or we could, like I said earlier, feel spaced out, feel numb, frozen. Our body shut down because our window tolerance is tighter and tighter, and that's what trauma does to our body. But when we begin to become aware of what's happening in us, when we begin to receive help by a professional, when people we love begin to comfort us and to provide that space that we need to grow, then our window of tolerance begins to grow. and we're able to deal better with life. That's why it's so important for us to understand that it's not about just changing behaviors. It's about allowing people to have enough space for the window tolerance to be big enough for them to be able to deal with life, especially when it comes to young kids, especially when it comes to church members, Christians. I mean, I believe God does a lot of great things in our lives. Jesus transforms, but sometimes we wonder, why is it that this brother, this sister, um, is acting this way? What is it that this, this small things triggers this person to do or behave a certain way? We need to think about, what is the window of tolerance? What has happened to them? What has affected them so much that even small things bring out the worst in them, as someone may say. So we are here to provide help. We are here to work with people so that their window tolerance could expand and they could better learn how to deal with life. So how deep is the mud? Earlier I mentioned that we have all experienced different things, and some people may say, well, I've gone through a lot of bad things and I'm all right. Why is it that someone else can't deal with it? And the reality is that it all depends on who you ask. Because as we see this picture, how deep is the mud? Um, to the big dog, the mud is not very deep. The mud only goes up to his leg. But look at the little dog. The mud almost drowned him. Now, should this give us a sense of superiority? Should we feel that because we can handle stuff better, we're superior to others? No, the reality is that um, the way our brain works, the environment we were raised in, we didn't have any control over those things. So, I mean, we are who we are. And if we could deal with things better than others, then praise God. But we should realize that there are people who are struggling, and as the word of God clearly says, we are meant to help people, right? To carry people's burdens. So if you are able to carry certain burdens because of just the way your mind is, the way you have been brought up, then you need to help those who, for whatever reason, cannot carry those burdens, and that's what Christ calls us to do, right? So again, how deep is the mud? It all depends on who you ask.
So when we look at trauma, we realize that it's intergenerational. And that basically means it comes through our gene pool, right? And as we are giving you guys so much information, I encourage you to do more research as well, because new stuff comes out every day that we're still learning as well. But when we talk about intergenerational trauma, we recognize that things are passed through not only through our families, but also racially. So if you see here, we look at Europeans or African Americans, or those who are in the Black diaspora, those who are in the India, we have British India, those who are in the Asian diaspora as well. Things come through that are traumatic. And so it's important to also connect this to the Bible. And scripture does say through the third and fourth generation. And it happens to us as well. If we look at things that have been going on in our world today, protesting for equality for people, a lot of that is trauma within a community. And so it can be trauma in your home, your family, it can be in your community, in a nation. And so it gets passed through. And so we just have to recognize that it's continuous, but you yourself can be the person to break that trauma. Can we go to the next slide? So we've given you guys so much information, and I'm so sorry about that. So let's take this time. I know some of you guys have done this with us, but let's take this time to relax, right? So we're gonna relax. None of us have been on vacation because of COVID. At least I hope you have been on a vacation, but be careful where you're vacationing. But we want you guys to relax, Listen to the beach, listen to the waves, the water, close your eyes and just breathe and just take all that you've learned.
So let's talk about what we just experienced. You could unmute yourself and just answer. How do you feel before the music came? The music change. Anyone?
It definitely escalates the emotional brain for sure. First, it was
So-
calmness, picture seeing it's just calm. And there's something about water that's really calming. Is that the only one that you want me to answer, or do you want me to go into the whole thing?
No, you did a good job. So it changed, right? First you were
Absolutely.
calm.
Yeah.
Then you felt a little agitated, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyone
And
else?
then more on hyper alert at the end. It's like, I'm
Okay.
out of here. I'm out of here.
Anybody else?
Yes, at first it was very relaxing to me, but on the last half of it, it was more of a I felt like nervous or agitated.
Yeah. And I think we all felt that way, right? Our team has seen this video multiple times, and every time I watch it personally, I sense a change in myself. Now this is interesting because for whatever reason we have been conditioned to feel or to understand that when that type of music comes about, that there's something wrong, right? As you look at the beach, I'm thinking about, is something going to pop out of the water? I'm thinking about, is someone gonna come out and hurt me? Now, nothing has changed in the scene. The scene is still the same. It's just a trigger. Something changed us. Now, this is so profound because there could be two people sitting at a beach with the same scene in front of them, and one of those people could be triggered by something. Now, the other person might not have that same trigger, and that person could think, what's going on? Is there something wrong with this person? Why is this person behaving this way? Why is he or she acting this way? And the reality is that person has been triggered, and now their senses are alert. Now that person feels like, there's something wrong. They're in danger, and because of that, he or she reacts and behave in a certain way. But this is not something that you could control easily. This is something that our body does when we get triggered, and that's the issue with trauma. When we have experienced certain things, it could be a point in our lives where certain things trigger us in a way that makes us react and behave as if we are in danger, and that could disturb our everyday life.
We enjoy doing that exercise because nothing changed, right? We're all still sitting in our same places. We were all still looking at the same scene, and we were all listening to music. But something changed, and your body felt it first. And so it's important for us to note that. All right, Eric, take us into our PowerPoint. I want you to think about, I have cinnamon here for those of you who can see me. So if you were in person, I would ask for a volunteer to come up and smell the cinnamon. What would it make you think of if I asked you to smell the cinnamon? Go ahead and put it in the chat. What might cinnamon, the smell of cinnamon, make you think of? So you can say it out loud or put it in the chat. Either is fine.
Apple cider.
Yes. Food. Apple pie. Yes, yes. All right. You can change the picture, Eric. Yes. For most people, when I carry this around, and we do these presentations, this is what they think about. And we talk about the body feeling it first, right? The snow smells it and you're there. You could close your eyes. You could taste the cider. You could feel the warmth. I've been doing this kind of training for a very long time, and I thought cinnamon was the safest thing I could find. But I was wrong. Not too long ago, I did this training, and the individual that came up and volunteered, close your eyes, smell the cinnamon, and she said to me, that reminds me of the smell in the forest when I was a child, and we were fleeing from the soldiers as they were burning our village. So right there, here I was thinking it was this positive thing, and it had been a trigger for her. And smell is one of the fastest ways the body is triggered. And so when we're working in our churches, we need to remember the senses, the music, the smells, the things that somebody could be experiencing. Where for some of you, cinnamon smelled lovely. Somebody put peace. For Kathy, cinnamon is peace. But for this other woman, cinnamon was when she was fleeing as a child. So it's that perspective. Okay, Eric.
Now, when we speak about triggers, there's actually a very beautiful way of explaining that with this hand model, as you can see, the hand model of the brain, of what happens, to just visualize it in our brain. As Ingrid had just mentioned, and before we did talk about triggers, right, just things that remind us of the past traumatic experience. If you want to hold up your hand and just make it like a fist and do that with me if you'd like to, it will just help you to grasp the concept, right? So we're assuming that this is our brain stem, right? Wherever your thumb is, this is pretty much the brain stem. That's also what we saw when we looked at the triune brain. And then it comes up here. This is our amygdala, and over that hovers the neocortex, right? And so when you close your fist, you see that the neocortex really covers the amygdala. Amygdala has our emotions, right? In the brain stem, we have our stress response, which is fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flock. We all learned about that. So the reason why the neocortex hovers over that and why we believe that God created that way is because here's where thinking and reasoning happens, right? If you think about it, this is the back of your brain. This is the front. We have the prefrontal cortex resting here as well. And this is what we need to use, or what our brain, like our body uses to reason. Now, when we have a trigger, we learned about cortisol, right? Cortisol is being released over the neocortex and it flips the lid. So now what do we have exposed here? That's emotions, right? Amygdala and our stress response, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flock. We don't, when we come into situations that trigger us, we usually cannot reason. Why? Because we flip our lid. Now let's think about this a little bit practical, right? This is just one person scenario, but imagine somebody who's going through the aftermath of a trauma, and they come into a situation where they are experiencing a flipped lid, as we call it, right? And we walk in there and maybe they don't even necessarily have that, but we say something and the lid flips. What if we happen two people where the lids are flipped, right? Do you think that we can come to any agreement? Probably not. Both of us are very much driven by emotions, right? And just wanting to survive. Our brain does that because it recognizes if I think I will die, that is just a natural response that God has given to us. Whereas we want to heal the brain and teach it to bring this neocortex down to reason again, right? And to say, you know what, no, this is not the dangerous experience that you have been through, and you can actually calm down. So how to do that, we will be teaching you now in the next couple slides. But before we do that, or actually this is already part of that, we want to think again about something that you all, I believe, are very much familiar with, because you're all, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, the health ministry leaders in your churches, right? And I think something that you read here at the side is very much familiar. Our brain is not our only where thinking happens and reasoning, it's also an organ, right? We need to make sure that our brain gets the resources that it needs, not only through, let's say, counseling or any other means, but also through sleep, exercise, nutrition, water, sunshine. This is New Start, right? This is something that we teach. So as we continue on to share maybe new methods with you, also let's not forget what we have already, especially a Seventh-day Adventist church. You know, let's teach them about New Start, because it will help individuals to heal from trauma as they have experienced it. And we just wanted to remind ourselves of that.
All right. So now we go straight into one of our doctrines, the sanctuary. But today, I'm actually going to tell you about what's called the sanctuary model of care. Interestingly enough, and some of you may be aware, a researcher, Sandra Bloom, came up with a model for trauma-informed organizations to be able to function. And you can see it there. Sanctuary model is a blueprint for clinical and organizational change, with at its core promotes safety and recovery from adversity through the active creation of a trauma-informed community. This is a secular model. Sandra Bloom did not call this model the sanctuary model of care because she knew about our sanctuary model within our belief system. But what I find amazing is the connections, the concept behind it. So let's think about this. When God gave instructions for the tabernacle, he was very clear about it. He was entering a traumatized people. The children of Israel were significantly traumatized. They had experienced traumas, deaths of their children, other things, right? They had intergenerational trauma. They had slavery. They were a traumatized people, and the sanctuary was to be in the middle amongst them. The Lord came to dwell in the middle of the muck. He didn't put the sanctuary somewhere far away. He put it right in the middle. Isn't that where our churches should be? Right in the middle of the muck, right in the middle of the trauma. Next slide. And then we don't have that much time because we could go step by step, right, of how Jesus shows us the plan of salvation with every step of that Old Testament sanctuary. And at the culmination is full restoration only by his blood. Now we know that. The secular model says that we need to look at each other, and instead of asking, what's wrong with you? We need to ask, what's happened to you? And then move into what is right with you. Isn't that what Jesus does? Does he look at us and say, what's wrong with you? Or does he understand and say, what's happened to you? And moves into what is right with you, because through his blood we are redeemed and restored. So again, what I'm doing for you is I'm comparing this secular model that really is what our churches, what our organizations should be. It's fully about safety and that model of coming together, right? The Israelites gathered at the sanctuary, at the tabernacle. And this is where the consistent and non-judgmental check-ins that we taught you at the very beginning. So if you are an organization that functions under the sanctuary model, then at every meeting, every time you gather, you're checking in with each other. How are you feeling? How can I support you? What do you need help with? And there isn't, it's an everybody. We're all in this together. We are a community of traumatized individuals that are going to support each other. Isn't that what the sanctuary was? Eric.
So what does it look like to have, like, as Professor Ingrid was saying, a trauma-informed church? Because that's what the church is supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be a place where people come from all walks of life and find healing. In order for the church to become a trauma-informed, it needs to be a place where people feel safe, where people don't feel judged. Now, does that mean that sin is not spoken about? Does that mean that everybody does everything they want to do? No, we're not talking about doctrines or sin, pointing out sin. We're talking about people, because at the end of the day, we are all broken, right? So the church needs to be a place where people feel safe. They could understand that even though they're broken, they're welcome in that place. Another thing that the church needs to do in order to be a trauma-informed church is that it needs to not only speak about doctrines and about the gospel, but there also has to be a focus on helping people deal with their emotions. I mean, we are emotional beings. That's the way we are made. And throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, you see God experiencing different emotions. You see Jesus crying in the New Testament. Wow, you see him sad. You see him happy. I mean, we are this, as humans, this is who we are. So the church needs to support and teach emotional regulation. The other thing that the church needs to do is build relationship. Go beyond just meeting one day a week or twice a week, but build relationship that lasts throughout the week. And if the church does this, then people will become whole. And this is what we are promoting. This is what we are advocating for people to become whole. People who have experienced trauma to find wholeness in the church. Furthermore, relationships are the essence of humanity. We are relational beings, and the church is supposed to be a relational entity. Jesus talks about the world knowing that he sent us when we love each other. That's the evidence, right? That Jesus has sent us to be his disciples. Resiliency is a word that's going around. If you're more interested in finding out exactly all the dynamics of resiliency, I advise you to do a little research. But resiliency mainly deals with being able to get back on the horse, as some people might say, being able to get knocked down but get up again. That's what resiliency is. And the church, as a church, we can help do that, right? That's biblical. We are called to help people stand up to regain control of their lives. Mastery. Pathfinder is an example of helping children learn mastery. Mastery builds resiliency. Resiliency builds wholeness, and this is what we're called to do, to build self-esteem. This is what a trauma-informed church does. Now let's talk about other solutions. As Sarah mentioned earlier, we know that eating healthy food is good for us. We talk about the environment, our nature, experiencing nature. The color green is a color that brings calmness, and God painted everything green for us in nature in order for us to be able to feel calm in his presence. I imagine how Adam and Eve felt in the garden with all that green around them, right? They felt calm. God built these things in order for us to become the people who he wants us to be. Music, listening to music, spending time with people. All of these things help us regain control of our lives.
Another powerful tool that we want to give into your hands is the countdown to reason. I'm actually personally really excited about that because it just works so well. So you can see, really, it's so simple. It's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I guess, rating. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but you know, when you have somebody, or even maybe yourself, going through a panic attack or an anxiety attack, usually people used to say, oh, you know, you need to breathe into a paper bag, right? Close your eyes, or put your head between your legs, you know, just to breathe, and also closing eyes. That's actually shown not to be very effective because of the introspection. If you are afraid already because something is causing you anxiety or a panic attack, just going into yourself may not necessarily help. So instead of that, look at, or encourage that person to look at 5 things that they can see, 4 things that they can feel, right? We see here 3 things that you can hear, just using all the senses, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you know about yourself that's positive. Now, sometimes people have really difficulties to think about something positive about themselves just because of their self-esteem, and that the lack of that. Nevertheless, you can also then change that and say, okay, what am I grateful for? And we will be speaking about gratefulness later on more. I have been like presenting and preparing presentations, and literally I was, I remember that I was preparing one of these presentations. As I was going through the material, it was triggering me. Just because of past trauma that I have experienced. And I realized that I just, you know, took a break. I looked up into my room and I did a countdown to reason. And within a few minutes, I was able to regain my focus and continue on working. So I highly encourage you to try it and also pass it on. It's a very simple tool.
Now let's talk a little bit about breathing. The first thing that God gave humanity after he formed their body was breath, right? In the Bible, we have that beautiful scene of God, Jesus coming down close to Adam and breathing into his nostril the breath of life. Breath is what keeps us going. Breath is what nurtures our brain, our body. So being able to breathe helps us, especially if we're breathing the right way. Now, there's something that we like to call pizza breathing, and I'm gonna come out of the sharing because I want to be able to see you. All right. So we're gonna do this thing called pizza breathing. So I want everybody to participate. All right. So you may not like pizza, or you may have certain topics you like in pizza. So whatever topic you like in pizza, put that topping in your brain. And if you don't like pizza, think about another food that you enjoy. So I want you to put that food in your hands and imagine that's right there in your hands, whether it's pizza, whether it's whatever other food you enjoy. If you're able to hold it in your hands, I want you to hold it in your hand, right? Now, I want you to to imagine that the food is very hot, right? And when the food is hot, you can really smell it, right? So as you have this food in your hand, I want you to smell the food. Just smell it. All right, so it smells good, right? It smells awesome. All right, now you want to eat it, but you can't eat it because it's too hot. So you have to blow it, right? So now this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna, once again, we're gonna smell it, and then we're gonna blow it, all right? Now let's do it one more time. Just one more time for fun. Now, how do you feel? I feel relaxed. And breathing technique is not something new. It's something that's been going on has been known for a long time. And I think that sometimes we hesitate to take advantage of these things, but these things could actually help us.
Thanks, Eric. We love to teach pizza breathing. And there's lots of things out there, different methods of breathing. We found that pizza breathing is a good one that we use with kids a lot. And then it becomes a symbol. I tell the story of where some kids I work with, they'll see me running around looking flustered and they'll make me a face and go like this, right? And so it becomes common language of skills that we can use. One of my favorites is to breathe in grace and breathe out praise. Because the thought is the in breath has to be smaller than the out breath. So if I can breathe praise out, I can calm, I can go into that parasympathetic nervous system. So here's another technique, because we get pretty excited about all these techniques. And we love the fact that they're easy and they're free. So this is about the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the wandering nerve, which wanders all through your body. And all of you can do some more research on it. But deep breathing helps that vagus nerve to calm down, to stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system. But one of our favorite things is called the foghorn breathing. This comes from Peter Levine's work. And basically, it has to do with getting that vagus nerve activated. Now, there's medical implants, there's other things that people do. And what's really fascinating before I jump into teaching the foghorn is that humming can stimulate the vagus nerve and loud singing can stimulate the vagus nerve. Isn't that what the Bible tells us to do, to sing? And when we present this, we have people that say, you know, my grandma, she was one of the strongest people I know who went through the worst situations and she was always humming. Maybe it was a way to self-soothe, to get that parasympathetic system activated. We think about Peter and Silas in jail, singing loudly. They were activating that vagus nerve and praising God in the process. So again, the foghorn, literally, think about a lighthouse is there to shine in the dark, but if it's foggy, you can't see it. So it needs to blow this loud, low noise that just kind of says, danger, stay away. So we do the same thing. We just blow low. So I encourage you to try it. You just go real low and you blow as long as you can. You can actually feel the vibrations. And that starts to stimulate the vagus nerve. So these are just quick, fast tips that we can teach you, and we could do a lot more with them. But we love to share these stories. And we know people that have said, I started doing that, the foghorn breathing, and I'm sleeping better at night. Or I used to have nightmares at night, and now I no longer have them. Again, we're not saying it's magic, but these are God-given tools that can help us as we go through these situations.
Now, here's one I hope you guys all practice normally, and I'm sure you do. It's not new to us as Christians, right? To be grateful, to have gratitude. But science is now giving, it's kind of backing up what we've already known, which is that being grateful increases a positive mood. It increases your happiness levels. And so when you're grateful for things, whatever you're grateful for, you do it in gratitude to God. And we can see this in the Bible when Daniel, when he's praying to God 3 times a day, he's also singing praises and just giving gratitude to God despite his circumstances. And so it's important to just, wherever you are, sometimes, like Eric was talking about, going outside, enjoying the grass and the trees, or enjoying music, and just being grateful for those things that God has given us, or being just grateful for trees, for air, for breath, and for your friends and family. So understand that gratitude increases so much of our positive energy, and it can help relax us and give us a better mood.
Now, I think you could tell already throughout this presentation that we like to share stories. And this is one of our favorite stories to share. It is actually a scientific experiment that just depicts so beautifully many of the things that we have been teaching you now. So there were researchers. They wanted to research what, certain stressors and possibly trauma does actually to the body as well. So they took a little monkey, as you can see here, and they put that monkey in a cage. And before they did that, however, this monkey was very happy. It was okay. And they took the vitals, right? Blood pressure, cortisol levels as well. We spoke about cortisol and so on and so forth. Anyway, they then put this monkey in the cage, as I said, and started to scare this little monkey. So they shook the cage. There was loud noise. And then after that, experience of this little monkey, and of course he was very scared, right? They again checked the vitals, and not surprisingly, they were skyrocket high. Now, in this experiment, they decided to change just simply one variable to see if it may make a difference on what this monkey's experience is. So after that monkey was relaxed again, they took a second monkey and put that little monkey with the other monkey together in the cage. And they did the very same thing to those monkeys as in the experiment before. They shook the cage, there was loud noise. And then after it, they were taking the vitals of the monkey again. And what they found is that the cortisol levels, right, the stress hormone that our body releases was 50% lower than when the monkey was alone, just simply because there was some other monkey that was going through this experience with him. We like to say, as trauma team, we need to be each other's monkeys, right? We need to be present with people. And sometimes that's very difficult because we don't like pain. Nevertheless, it has shown that there is significant change for us in our experience, even in our physical response when we have somebody who's going with us through this stressful situation. So be this person of hope, that person of safety for somebody in your community.
So one of our favorite authors is Diane Langberg, and she talks about working with individuals that have trauma. And that's why we're all here. We're here because we work in our churches and our communities with individuals that have experienced difficult things. And in John 11, there's the story of Lazarus. And we know that Jesus was the one responsible for that resurrection, for that full restoration of Lazarus. But yet he chose to ask humans to help. And that's what we feel we are called to do in this group. You're here because you feel the calling to help. And you remember when Jesus stood there, he said, "Take away the stone." Now, in all his power, did he need humans to move the stone? And that must have been hard work. You know, you can imagine them rolling the stone. And then the miracle happens, right? Because a miracle is always Jesus causing that restoration, causing that resurrection. But he calls Lazarus out, and then he asks humans, what does he say? He says, unbind him and let him go. Isn't that what we're called to do? Now, do you think about this moment, to come up to Lazarus? Even Mary and Martha had said, Lord, the body's probably smelling. And I don't know what those bandages might have smelled like. I don't know what that whole process would have been like. It might have been nerve-wracking to come up and be the one to unwrap him. But that's what we're being called to do. We're being called to come up to that person where Jesus has done the restoration on the inside. That's his job. But we've been asked to participate. And it's not going to be easy work. And it may not be pleasant work to be there with someone when they're going through something like this. But we're called. Jesus went into what sometimes we say, into the yuck. We're called to go into the yuck.
So we've given you guys a lot of information again. And don't worry, we're not going to do another beach scene, so you can stay calm. But we just wanted to talk to you about what happens when you leave here today. And so we're going to do some breakout rooms. And we want you guys just to think about 3 things you learned, 2 things you want to share with others, and then 1 thing you're going to actually implement into your own life. And so first think about them, and then you can share them with your groups. Feel free to also share them with those who are in the rooms with you, wherever you may be, if you're with your families or with friends as well. And we hope you were able to learn a lot.
Welcome back, everybody.
You mean it's already 4 minutes?
Yeah, time goes by. And as you can tell, we kind of cruise through very quickly. But in summary, to remember that we are hurting people, and there's people around us that are hurting with wounds that are unseen. But that God has a plan of restoration, and that our churches are key. Our churches are key. And yes, we can teach you some of these fun techniques, whether it's pizza breathing or foghorn breathing. But within everything, and we didn't have that much time to go into, is the importance of relationships. When you think about those 3 pillars, the importance of relationships, that healing must happen in community. Eric, why don't you share with us our last verse, and then we'll open it up for questions. So at the center, we have chosen this as our verse because, again, as we were talking about, when we walk into these situations, when we look at these scans of the brain, when we look at the ACE study and the significance of it, it's devastating. But yet we're the ones who are called to be the people of hope. But the only way to do that, to overflow with hope, is that God has to give us that hope. And so that is our prayer, that daily God can fill us with joy, with peace, so that then we can overflow into others.